Perceptions of Rape and Sexual Harassment Among STEM Majors, which I conducted under the mentorship of Dr. Lori McCubbin. Basically, my research examines the differences by gender on sex rotates and by perceptions on sexual harassment, gender roles, and rape. A little bit of background about the issues pertaining to my study. In the United States, over 200,000 people are victims of sexual assault per year. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 33 college men report being the survivors of rape or attempted rape sometime in their lives. Now, this is why this research is important to study, because this is not an isolated issue. These numbers mean that sometime in your life, you will probably be impacted either directly or indirectly by sexual violence. So 91% of sexual assault victims are females, and males make up the large majority of perpetrators, making up 99% of perpetrators. This type of crime is also prevalent on the Palouse. Alternatives to Violence of the Palouse, also known as ATVP, is a nonprofit organization just dedicated to helping victims of these types of crimes. This is the client data from ATVP for the current fiscal year 2011 and 2012. And the way this works is it is broken up into different terms, each encompassing 3 months. So as you can see, the 4th term is missing because it hasn't been completed yet. So in actuality, these numbers are going to be a lot higher than this. So SA, which stands for sexual assault, currently has 87 cases reported. And another thing to note about this is that the other categories, such as domestic violence, ED, and crime victim services right here, stalking, and also child, involve varying degrees of sexual assault cases in them, or some of them do. And that's not reported in these figures because ATVP only logs it under the primary reason this client is seeking our support. And so 60% of sexual assault cases are reported to the police. So that's a really low number. And this is important to note because this type of crime is highly underreported not only to the police but also to organizations like ATVP and also just in general. And through my personal experience as an advocate for ATVP and also through the previous research, I found that there are several reasons why people don't report this. But the popular most popular 3 reasons people don't report this crime is because 1, they're scared of retaliation, or they're scared of the stigma that comes with it, of being embarrassed. 2, that they don't think it's important enough to report. They don't think that anybody can do anything for them, so they don't want to report it. Or 3, that they internalize it, so they blame themselves for what happened. They say things like, if I could have done this, or if I should have done this differently, then this wouldn't have happened. And that's a societal tool known as victim blaming, where all the blame is placed on the victim and away from the perpetrator or society itself. And this is able to work off of an ideology called rape myths. And that 3rd point is one that I examined more closely in my research. So the cause of sexual victimization reflects numerous factors relating to the normalization of sexual harassment, gender roles, and also rape myth acceptance. A little bit about the previous literature. Previous literature has found that gender identity is correlated with perceptions of rape and sexual harassment, with males typically holding more favorable views towards these issues than any other gender group. Perpetrators of sexual violence have been found to have more rigid views on gender roles and to adhere to these proper roles of men and women in our society. Among these beliefs, like I said, are rape myths that justify and harbor aggressiveness and hostility. And adherence to rape myths allow perpetrators to misperceive their victims' actual intentions. So perpetrators of sexual violence have been found to harbor feelings of hostility and resentment towards women oftentimes. And a consistent finding in the previous research is that sexually violent men usually always emerge from sexually violent subcultures. And an example of sexually violent subcultures in a lot of the recent research is fraternities, gangs, and sports teams. And sexually violent subcultures are almost always male-dominated. People in male-dominated areas have a tendency to perceive situations that constitute the legal definition of rape and sexual harassment as not meeting that criteria. And this can be attributed to the findings that males in general have a greater tendency to perceive rape and sexual harassment less severely than women. focused largely on the workforce, and on a college setting has focused on fraternities and has been taken from a social sciences perspective. That's why my research is unique, because there has been no previous research done examining these issues within male-dominated academic realms like the STEM majors, which is in fact very male-dominated, with women earning as low as 20% of bachelor's degrees in these areas. A few definitions. Gender identity. Gender identity is defined as a multidimensional construct encompassing an individual sense of membership into a gender category, how compatible that individual feels with that gender category, the pressure one may feel for gender conformity, and also attitudes toward gender roles. Rape is defined as the violence that occurs when a victim does not consent to sexual activity. Rape occurs when penetration of any part of the body is obtained through force, coercion, threats, or if a victim is unable to consent or refuse. Rape myth is a product of cultural and psychological ideology of victim blaming that marginalizes victim injuries or holds the victim responsible for the crime occurring. So a couple examples of rape myths in our society that are really popular is if a woman wears a short dress, then she was just asking to be raped, or if somebody's drinking a lot at a bar, then they obviously want to have sex with somebody, which isn't always true. So, and another example of rape myths that's more insidious, I think, is in a lot of the training and education around these issues that really teach people how not to be victims of sexual violence instead of teaching people not to perpetrate sexual violence. Which just goes back into that cycle of victim blaming. You were educated, you were trained, why did you do this? Kind of thing. Sexual harassment. This is another reason why my study is unique, because sexual harassment as a category of sexual violence has been unexplored. It's mostly been focused on the issues of rape. So sexual harassment has been hard to define because research doesn't have a consistent definition of sexual harassment. However, the research have these definitions in common, and that is any unwanted or uninvited sexual behavior which is offensive, embarrassing, degrading, or intimidating. So my hypotheses. I formulated 4 hypotheses, and my first hypothesis is that males compared to females will score lower on the attitudes towards women scale, indicating more traditional attitudes towards the gender role of women. My hypothesis 2 is that males compared to females will score lower on the college date rape attitude scale, indicating more accepting views towards rape myths. My hypothesis 3 is that males compared to females will score higher on the sexual harassment attitude scale, indicating more favorable views towards sexual harassment. And my hypothesis 4 is that those who identify as masculine sex types will have more traditional gender role beliefs and also endorse rape myths and sexual harassment more than feminine sex type, androgynous sex type, or undifferentiated sex type participants. My methodology. My sample consisted of students from a medium-sized rural university. I had 48 participants, 19 were male and 29 were female. Majority of the participants identified as 22 years old, 4th year college students, middle class, socioeconomic status background, non-Greek affiliated, non-first generation scholar, and monoracial. So most of my participants identified their race as Asian American, with 28 participants being Asian American, followed by white, Pacific Islander, Latino, Native American, and unsure, meaning that they said that they didn't know their ethnicity. And as you can see here, I had 48 participants, however, only 45 of those participants were valid because 3 of those surveys were missing data, so I could not use them. This is a breakdown by major that was identified. So 9 participants identified as non-STEM, and the most popular identified STEM major was biology with 8 participants. I asked a total of 5 different questionnaires in my survey, and a demographics questionnaire, which includes 8 questions, including age, gender, race, major, year in school, socioeconomic status background, if they are a part of a Greek organization, and if they are a first-generation scholar. This is an example of what my demographics questionnaire looked like. It was a little bit different because it was on online survey format. The BEM Sectoral Inventory, also known as the BMSRI, or most commonly known as just the BEM, was adapted by Sandra Bem and contains 3 measures measuring stereotypically masculine and feminine attributes and also gender neutrality. For the purposes of my study, I only really focus on the masculine and the feminine. So it consists of 60 items and has been found to have high internal consistency and high test-retest reliability. This is an example of some of the questions from the BEM sexual inventory, where respondents were asked to rate themselves on a 7-point Likert scale, from 1 being never to almost never true, to 7 being almost to always true. So a couple of examples of the items on the BEM sexual inventory is self-reliant, yielding, helpful, defends on beliefs, cheerful. So the way that works is there's different masculine, feminine, and gender-neutral attributes, and we are able to calculate their sexual type from there. The Attitudes Towards Women scale, also known as the AWS, was adapted by Spence and Helmrich and measures respondents' attitudes towards the rights of women and gauges the respondents' level of gender role stereotyping. And it consists of 15 questions and has been found to have good internal consistency and satisfactory test-retest reliability. This is an example of the Attitudes Towards Women scale, where participants were asked to rate themselves on a 4-point response system, from 1 being strongly agree to 4 being strongly disagree. So a couple examples from this scale. Number 1 was swearing and obscenity are more repulsive in the speech of a woman than of a man. Number 2 was under modern economic conditions, with women being active outside the home, men should share in household tasks such as washing the dishes and doing laundry. So respondents have to gauge how strongly they agreed or disagreed with these statements. The College Date Rape Attitude Scale, or as I call it, the CDRAS, was adapted by Lanier and Elliott and measures rape-related attitudes of college students and contains 20 questions and has been shown to have high internal consistency for attitudes and moderate for behaviors, and has been shown to have high test-retest reliability. This is an example of some of the items from the College Date Rape Attitude Scale, where respondents were asked to rate themselves on a 5-point response system, from 1 being strongly agree to 5 being strongly disagree. And some of the items on this scale were, for example, males and females should share the expenses of the date, or talking about sex destroys the romance of that particular moment, or most women enjoy being submissive in sexual relations. The Sexual Harassment Attitudes Scale, or as I call it, the SHAS, was adapted by Mazur and Percival and assesses attitudes toward sexual harassment and contains 19 items and has been found to have high internal consistency. This is an example of some of the items from the Sexual Harassment Attitudes Scale, where respondents were asked to rate themselves on a 5-point response system, with 1 being strongly agree and 5 being strongly disagree. And a couple of examples from the items from this scale. Item 1 states, an attractive woman has to expect sexual advances and should learn how to handle them. Item 2 states, most men are sexually teased by many of the women with whom they interact on the job or at school. The Marlowe-Crown Social Desirability Scale was adapted by Marlowe and Crown and measures level of social desirability of participants and contains 33 items and has been found to have acceptable internal consistency. This is an example of some of the items from the Marlowe-Crown Social Desirability Scale, where respondents were asked to rate themselves as true or false on these items as it pertains to them personally. So a couple of examples from the Marlowe-Crown Social Desirability Scale. Item 1 states, before voting, I thoroughly investigate the qualifications of all the candidates. Number 2 states, I never hesitate to go out of my way to help someone in trouble. So this scale is pretty much to gauge how socially desirable a respondent answers, which is important, especially, I think, with a study like mine, where people might feel like they have to answer socially desirable. Data collecting procedures. My study was approved by the Institutional Review Board and was administered through SurveyMonkey.com. I sent out emails to potential participants within the STEM majors that had a letter in it that stated the purpose of my study, what my study was about, the risks, which were no more than minimal risk. However, if they did have concerns or discomfort that arose during my survey, I provided a list of sources that they could utilize. And also rewards, which was a $50 Barnes & Noble gift certificate to compensate them for their time. My survey was also anonymous, so there was no personally identifying information that could connect the participant to their survey. My results. This is the BEM sexual inventory by gender within STEM majors. Now this is just a distribution. I wasn't able to run a correlation using the BEM sexual inventory with the other measures because of time and also because of my small sample size. But so far, we're finding that most participants are in the sex category of undifferentiated or androgynous, and androgynous means that they scored high on the masculinity scale and high on the femininity scale, which means that they're a balance of both masculine and feminine attributes. Undifferentiated means they scored low on femininity and low on masculinity, which means that their answers were kind of all over the place, so we couldn't determine where they fell. And this is a bar graph of the BEM by gender within the STEM majors. And this is male and this is female, so far we're finding that males and females do not discriminate on the basis of sex roles, but further analysis needs to be done on that. This is an ANOVA distribution by gender within the STEM majors. So here in the green